Today we're going to be working on equivalent fractions. Today, instead of using models as much, we're going to focus more on multiplication and division. We're going to start with the model though. So here's a big blue square, and I'm going to break it into 4 equal pieces. And what we need to do is first we need to figure out what fraction I have drawn. So I've got 3 shaded pieces out of 4 equal pieces. So I've got 3/4. So that's the first thing I had to do. I had to figure out what fraction I had to start with. Now I want to find an equivalent fraction. So what I can do is I can divide each of these smaller squares into even smaller parts. So I'm going to cut them all in half. So now I have 6 shaded parts out of 8. So I have 6/8. My shaded part didn't change. I just cut the pieces even smaller. So 3/4 and 6/8 are equivalent fractions. They're equal. They take up the same amount of space. Here's another model. This time we have a big rectangle. And I'm going to cut it into some smaller spaces. So I've got 3 shaded parts out of 6. So what is my fraction for this shape? It is 3/6. Now I want to find an equivalent fraction. For my first example, I made the pieces even smaller, but they're pretty small already. I could make them smaller, but this time we're actually going to combine some. So I'm going to make a new thing the same size. I'm going to shade in the same amount, but this time I have 2 parts, and 1 part is shaded. So we've got 1/2. So 3/6 and 1/2 are equivalent. So they each take up the same amount of space. I just combine 3 of those parts into 1. So with my first example of 3/4 and 6/8, we can still use our models, and we can draw them, and we can see visually that these are the same. But we can also use multiplication. So 3 times what equals 6? It's 2. It's very important today that you do the same thing to the top and the bottom. So if we multiply the top number, the numerator, by 2, we need to multiply the bottom number, the denominator, by 2. So 4 times 2 equals 8. So 3/4 times 2 equals 6/8. For my second example, we had 3/6 and 1/2. So here were the models we used, and we can see that those are equal or equivalent fractions. But we could also use division. So 3 divided by what equals 1? 3. We need to do the same thing we do to our numerator, to our denominator. So 6 divided by 3 equals 2. So instead of having to draw all those pictures and try and make everything exactly the same size, we can just multiply or divide. Although those models still can be helpful. Okay. Go ahead and try this one along with me. So we want to find an equivalent fraction for this fraction. So 2/10. You can use models and try and find something that's the same size as 2/10. But I'm going to use multiplication and division. So I could divide both of these by 2. So 2 divided by 2 equals 1. 10 divided by 2 equals 5. So 2/10 is equivalent to 1/5. So I could stop right there. I found an equivalent fraction, but I always like to find some extras, especially while we're doing examples. So if I have 2/10, instead of dividing the numerator and denominator by 2, I could multiply them both by 2. So 2 times 2 is 4, 10 times 2 is 20. So 4/20 is equivalent to 2/10. So here at the bottom I'm going to write all my fractions that are equivalent. 2/10 is equal to 1/5, and they're both equal to 4/20. And I could really keep going like forever. I could find 100 equivalent fractions. So I could do 2 times 5 is 10, 10 times 5 is 50. So 10/50 is equivalent. I could multiply 2/10 by 10 and get 20 100ths. I could multiply 2/10 by 37 or 1,000 or 42. And I could get a whole giant list of equivalent fractions. But my instructions just said find unequivalent fraction. So when you see the instructions and it says find unequivalent fraction or 2 equivalent fractions, you should say thank you for not making me find 20 or 100, because you could really find thousands and thousands of equivalent fractions if you just kept multiplying your 2/10 by more and more numbers. So here's another one. This time our instructions are to find each unknown. So I have 4/8 and it equals some kind of halves. So what I need to do is I need to figure out what they multiplied or divided 4/8 by to be able to get halves. So we have to find either the numerator or the denominator, find what the pattern is. So the only part that we have both of is the bottom number, our denominator. So we have an 8 that turns into a 2. So if it's getting smaller, we know they must be dividing. So 8 divided by what equals 2? It's 4. So since we divided our denominator by 4, we need to do the same to our numerator. So divided by 4. So 4 divided by 4 is going to tell us what x is. So x is 1. Okay, so now it's your turn. First problem. Write the fraction for the part that is shaded, and then find an equivalent fraction. So what do we have shaded here? And then find an equivalent fraction. Number 2. Find an equivalent fraction for 6/8. And remember, you should say, thank you for not making me find 20. Number 3. Find an equivalent fraction for 70 100ths. And fourth, find the unknown for 4/10 equals how many 100ths. Thank you, and have a great day.